When people think about the Crusades, they usually think about horrible atrocities committed by European Christians against Muslims in the Levant. While this is certainly true, it's also an incomplete story. The Crusades were not just about destruction, but also cultural exchange and learning. In fact, these religious wars had a major impact on the course of European history, helping to pave the way for the Renaissance. What did Europeans learn from their Muslim subjects? How did the Crusades help lay the foundations for the Renaissance? And why was the Renaissance such a big deal? Let's find out. The Crusades were a series of religious wars between European Christians and Muslims over control of the Holy Land. They lasted from 1095 to 1291, with several notable campaigns taking place in between. The First Crusade was launched in 1095 after Pope Urban II called on European Christians to take back Jerusalem from Muslim control. After years of fighting, the Crusaders succeeded and established several states in the Levant, which lasted for almost 2 centuries. Despite being known for their violence, the Crusades were also a time of cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East. During this time, European Christians had access to ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved by Muslims. This led to a rediscovery of classical knowledge and an increase in philosophical and scientific thought in Europe. One example of this is the work of Averroes, a Muslim philosopher who lived in Spain in the 12th century. He wrote commentaries on Aristotle's works that helped to introduce the European Aristotelianism. This renewed interest in classical philosophy had a profound impact on medieval universities, shaping the curriculum and encouraging debate and discussion among scholars. It also laid the groundwork for the rise of humanism during the Renaissance. But it wasn't just about rediscovering old texts. The Crusades also saw the exchange of new ideas between Europe and the Middle East. For example, European Crusaders learned about the use of Arabic numerals and algebra from their Muslim subjects. These mathematical concepts were then incorporated into European scholarship, where they eventually replaced Roman numerals and the cumbersome methods of calculation that had been used previously. The adoption of Arabic numerals and algebraic thinking revolutionized mathematics in Europe and had a lasting impact on the development of science and technology. Another important contribution of the Crusades to the intellectual life of Europe was the introduction of new scientific instruments and techniques. For example, European Crusaders came into contact with the astrolabe, a device used for navigation and astronomy, which was invented in the Islamic world. They also learned about the use of eyeglasses, which had been developed in Italy but were widely adopted in the Middle East. These technological innovations were incorporated into European culture and contributed to the scientific and technological advancements of the Renaissance. In addition to the exchange of knowledge, the Crusades also helped to break down stereotypes and promote mutual understanding between European Christians and Muslims. Despite the often violent nature of the Crusades, there were many instances of peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange between the two groups. For example, there are numerous accounts of European Crusaders visiting Muslim scholars and asking for their help in translating ancient texts. This exposure to different cultures and traditions helped to broaden the horizons of European scholars and pave the way for the Renaissance, a period of great cultural and intellectual ferment in Europe. The Renaissance was a period of cultural and intellectual rebirth in Europe that began in the 14th century and lasted until the 17th century. It marked a transition from the medieval worldview to a more modern perspective that emphasized human reason and individualism. Several factors contributed to the start of the Renaissance, including the rediscovery of classical texts, the introduction of new technologies, and the increased contact with other cultures. One of the most significant aspects of the Renaissance was its emphasis on humanism, a philosophical and intellectual movement that celebrated human potential and achievements. Humanist scholars studied classical Greek and Roman texts and sought to emulate the ideals of those civilizations in their own work. This renewed interest in classical antiquity led to a revival of ancient art, architecture, and literature, and inspired new forms of artistic expression. Another important feature of the Renaissance was its focus on reason and empirical observation, rather than relying solely on religious dogma or traditional beliefs. This shift in thinking allowed for the questioning of long-held assumptions and the exploration of new ideas and theories. As a result, the Renaissance witnessed major advances in science, mathematics, and astronomy, as well as a growing interest in the natural world and the human body. Perhaps most importantly, the Renaissance was a time of great creativity and innovation across various fields of study. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo produced masterpieces that continue to inspire awe and wonder today. Scientists like Nicolaus Copernicus and Galileo Galilei made groundbreaking discoveries that revolutionized our understanding of the universe. And writers like William Shakespeare and Miguel de Cervantes created timeless works of literature that have been performed and enjoyed by audiences for centuries. So, how did the Crusades contribute to the Renaissance? Well, first off, the Crusades helped to pave the way for increased trade and cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East. This led to the introduction of new ideas, technologies, and artistic motifs that stimulated creativity and innovation in Europe. For example, the Crusades helped to establish trade routes that connected European markets to the riches of the East, such as spices, textiles, and luxury goods. This increased exposure to different cultures and goods sparked interest and inspired artists and scientists in Europe to experiment with new materials and techniques. Furthermore, the Crusades led to the establishment of European trading posts in the Middle East, such as the Crusader states of Edessa, Antioch, and Jerusalem. These outposts served as hubs for cultural exchange and facilitated the flow of ideas between European Christians and Muslim scholars. This exposure to different cultures and perspectives broadened the horizons of European thinkers and encouraged them to challenge traditional beliefs and explore new ideas. For instance, European crusaders who visited Muslim centers of learning in the Middle East came into contact with ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved by Muslim scholars. This rediscovery of classical knowledge sparked a revival of interest in ancient philosophy, science, and literature, which became a hallmark of the Renaissance. It was during this time that European scholars began to study Arabic texts directly, leading to the translation of many important works into Latin. This allowed European scholars to access a wealth of knowledge on topics such as mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, which had been preserved and advanced by Muslim scholars. For example, the works of Muslim mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi introduced European scholars to concepts such as algebra and arithmetic, which had been developed and refined in the Islamic world. Similarly, the astronomical observations and theories of Muslim astronomers like al-Biruni and al-Suli were instrumental in shaping the development of astronomy in Europe. The Crusades also helped to promote the exchange of scientific instruments and techniques between Europe and the Middle East. For example, European crusaders came into contact with the astrolabe, a device used for navigation and astronomy, which had been invented in the Islamic world. They also learned about the use of eyeglasses, which had been developed in Italy but were widely adopted in the Middle East. These technological innovations were incorporated into European culture and contributed to the scientific and technological advancements of the Renaissance. By promoting trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of knowledge, the Crusades helped to lay the foundations for the Renaissance. While the Crusades were primarily known for their violent and often brutal nature, they also played a significant role in shaping the intellectual and cultural landscape of Europe. The exposure to new ideas, technologies, and artistic influences from the Middle East helped to stimulate creativity and innovation in various fields, contributing to the rise of the Renaissance. However, it is essential to acknowledge that the Crusades were not a monolithic phenomenon and that there were varying degrees of cultural exchange and learning among different Crusader factions and individuals. While some Crusaders were open to engaging with Muslim scholars and incorporating new ideas into their own work, others were more hostile towards non-Christian cultures and resistant to change. Nevertheless, the Crusades as a whole left an indelible mark on European history and helped to pave the way for the cultural and intellectual revolution that would transform Europe in the centuries to come. What do you guys think? Did you know that the Crusades contributed to the Renaissance? Are there any other events that you think we should cover in this series? Please let us know in the comments below. Also, thank you so much for your support and liking the video. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.